3.4.2. Canto 3, Chapter 4, text number 2. Okay? Canto 3. Vidura approaches Maitreya. Tesha Maitreya doshena Vishami krita chetasam Nimlochati Rabha. Something's missing. Nimlochati Rabha. Repeat. Nimlochati Rabha. Something's missing. Venunam iva mardanam. Deshamayreya doshena. Vishami krita chetasam Nimlochati Rabha. What? Something's missing. Asit Venunam iva mardanam. It's just the asit word is not printed here. Maybe it's in your handheld device. But for your information, it's not in the printed version. Go ahead. Someone. Deshamayreya doshena Vishami krita chetasam
Deshamayreya doshena Vishami krita chetasam Nimlochati Ravavasi Venunam iva martanam Deshamayreya
doshena Vishami krita chetasam Nimlochati Rabha asit Venunam iva martanam. Ladies. Deshamayreya doshena
Vishami krita chetasam Nimlochati Rabha asit Venunam iva martanam. Deshamayreya doshena Vishami krita chetasam Nimlochati Rabha asit Venunam iva martanam. Deshamayreya doshena Vishami krita chetasam Nimlochati Rabha asit Venunam iva martanam.
Tesham of them Maireya of intoxication Doshena by the faults Vishami krita became unbalanced Chetasam of those of whom the minds Nimlochati sets Raval the sun Asit takes place Venunam of the bamboos Iva as Mardanam destruction. Translation: as by the friction of bamboos destruction takes place, so also at sunset By the interaction of the faults of intoxication, all their minds became unbalanced, and destruction took place. Purport. When there is need of fire in the forest, by the will of the Supreme, it takes place due to friction among the bamboos. Similarly, the descendants of Yadu were all destroyed by the will of the Supreme Lord by the process of self-destruction. Just as there's no possibility of a fire's occurring deep in the forest due to human effort, so also there was no power in the universe which could vanquish the descendants of Yadu who were protected by the Lord. The Lord wanted them to be so destroyed, and thus they obeyed his order, as indicated by the word tan, anugyata. That's from the previous verse, tad, anugyata. Permitted by the Brahmanas, tad, anugyata. That's Prabhupada's word for word from text 1. So being permitted by the Brahmanas, the Yadus took part of the remnants of prasad and also drank liquor made of rice. And why would Brahmanas permit that? Did you discuss that the other day? No? I'm surprised. Everyone asked us some the scripture questions. Why? And we always say, Leela. It's the whitewash answer. Leela. But it's Leela. So what's Leela? Specifically, Leela is one of the sub-potencies of the Swarup Shakti of the Supreme Lord. What's Swarup Shakti? His own spiritual potency. One of the potencies, one of the sub-potencies of Swarup Shakti is Leela Shakti. And it's an agency by which Leelas happen. And Leelas happen through the agency of Leela Shakti because the Supreme Lord wills it. He doesn't have to do anything. His Leela Shakti carries out his will. Very clever. He doesn't have to do anything. He doesn't have anything to do. He doesn't have to do anything. And he does so many things through the agency of his potencies. So going back, if one doesn't, Jiva Goswami writes, if one does not accept that Bhagavan, this is in Bhagavat Sandarbha, if one does not accept that Bhagavan has unlimited and inconceivable potencies, the consequence is there's no possibility of understanding God or Parabrahman. Because there are persons that think Brahman is it, without understanding Parabrahman, because they don't accept that Parabrahman has Shaktis, and therefore a foundational principle of Bhagavat Tattva is Bhagavan includes unlimited and inconceivable potencies, both unlimited and inconceivable. So how are you going to conceive of the inconceivable? Answer, you can't. Well, then how can you verify? By material efforts, you can't. Then if I can't by material efforts, how am I supposed to accept that on another means of knowing, another pramana? What's that? Apauruṣeyā sabda pramana, that's how we can know. We had this question came up in the retreat over the weekend. You know, someone asked, innocent question, wasn't a challenging question. We read all these things about creation, how do we know? And the answer is you can't. And Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, you can't. Unless It's revealed, and it's revealed through Scripture. Supposing I'm dull. Some of us are dull. So I'm dull, and Scripture says, now how am I supposed to understand this? Because I'm dull. The Scripture says it. And even if we don't understand in the worldly sense of understanding, we can understand on the authority of Shabda Praman, or specifically, apauruṣeyā Shabda Praman. That's how we can know. And supposing somebody doesn't know and they don't understand, then what do? They do different things. One of the things they do is the mythology word. And if it's mythology and not truth, this is your question yesterday about honesty and truth. If it's not honest, it's just mythology, then it's subject to interpretation. Because this means that. Because it's mythology. Now, supposing our acharyas help us, they hold our hand, and through apauruṣeyā Shabda Praman, they say, this is helping us to understand that. Is that allowed? Definitely it's allowed. Like the classic example from the Vedas is, see over there, there's a tree. See in the branches of the tree, there's the moon. But the moon is not in the branches of the tree. It's just from the perspective of where you're standing at this moment. The moon at this moment happens to be as if in the branches of a tree. There was a message that was Jivanajivana prepared for helping people understand this principle, and it was nice. I had to ask it twice. What's this and what? It's a crane that has the big arms extended up in the air, and then this thing extending down from the crane with a little hook on the end. And then in the background is the moon, and it looks like, the perception is the crane is holding up the moon. So sense perception is inadequate. So what's the reality versus perception? And there's often a big gap between reality with a capital R, even with a small r, with to speak with a capital R. So how are we to get reality? How do we get truth? How do we get, from our discussion yesterday evening, honesty? It's connected to the absolute truth. Well, that's great. How do I get to the absolute truth? Apauruṣeyā Shabda Praman. And if you don't take that as the means of knowing, then you're not going to know. And so therefore, whatever you have as any value, whatever it might be, honesty was the one discussed yesterday, then it's not honesty. It's a reflection of, and we may want to follow the reflection of, if it's, through the lens of mode of goodness, that is, this is to be done, that's not to be done, and one who's honest does this and doesn't do that, and speaks the truth, and all those reflection definitions of what honesty is, or any quality, pick them. There's many qualities, vishishtas. This is, philosophy. Vishishta means an attribute or quality, characteristic of something. So when describing the qualities or characteristics of the Supreme Lord, these are his vishishtas. But the vishishtas are resting on a person. Well, supposing you don't believe in a person, a supreme person, then it's mythology. And you're not going to understand it, even if you're very honest. This means that. Just listening to Prabhupada discuss this morning, people that have that position, the mythology position, then they just romper room. There was no battlefield. This is Gandhi. There was no battlefield. If I am to accept, this is what I haven't read his in Gujarati words, but what I understand his words say, if I'm supposed to accept that there actually was a battle at Kurukshetra, and Krishna was directing the chariot of Arjuna into battle, then I reject Bhagavad Gita. My Krishna is this. Romper room. Interesting, knowing all that, Prabhupada then encouraged Gandhi to go preach Bhagavad Gita around the world. To popularize Bhagavad Gita because it wasn't worldwide popular. I mean, scholarly popular, but not worldwide popular. So this situation, from the yesterday's verse and today's verse, the Brahmanas approved. With the permission, so it's culture, the Kshatriyas sought the permission of the Brahmanas. And the Brahmanas approved. Now, why did the Brahmanas approve? One can say they knew the Lord's plan, or one can also say, inspired by the Supreme Lord within their hearts, the Brahmanas approved, because the Lord had a plan. So that's what's in this morning's verse. Yesterday was the Brahmanas approved. Then this morning's verse is Supreme Lord approved. Why? He had an intention. And his intentions are infallible. Well, wait a minute. It's a bad intention. The moralist would say. He's bad. How can he be all good? Because look at this. He inspired to drink wine, and then he inspired that they get mad, then he inspired that they beat each other up and killed each other. Is that not bad? You want to tell me that's not bad? You got holes in your head, man. That's bad. That's bad. If you did that, I'd point a finger at you and say, you're bad. You're in jail. You're to be punished. So why did he do it? There's many explanations of why he did it. But we don't have to have an explanation. He did it. But one of the explanations is very easy to understand. The Yadus were empowered. And the descendants of the Yadus would also be empowered as descendants of those empowered. And the descendants of those descendants would be empowered. And through the passage of time as Kali Yuga advanced, their undefeatable power would be corrupted by the influence of Kali, because after Krishna's departure, which is the next verse, next few verses, Krishna departs and Kali Yuga begins. So knowing that Kali Yuga is going to begin and he's going to depart, he wants to withdraw the Yadus so they don't get Kali Yugaized and disturb everybody. Now, after they're gone, what's left? Some other people are going to disturb people, influenced by Kali. But at least they can be defeated. No, anyone can be defeated by Krishna, so he doesn't have to do it that way, one can argue. Look, if your supreme has unlimited inconceivable potencies, why does he have to do it this way? He's bad. Or he made a mistake. Good people shouldn't suffer, they shouldn't drink, and they shouldn't kill each other off, and it's like it's a wrong pastime. Sitting above the Supreme Lord. So another explanation why is their service to him was now complete, and it was time, at least for many, to return to the spiritual world, or to the demigod portion of the Yadu dynasty members, or expansions of demigods, or etc. They can go back to their abodes. Thanks very much, guys. You can now return to your abode. So how's that going to happen? Leela Shakti. And is it possible it could have been done some other way? Why not? And a number of other possibilities. He did it the way he did it. It's not our position to say, harumph. I don't like the way he did it. It's not how I would do it. No, if I was God, here's the script. And that's not our position. So we don't want to make that offense. We may want to understand. That's good to want to understand. But to become judgmental about the Lord's Leela, that's not so good. Very problematic. So now what do? It's not how we would do it, and modern sensibility says bad. And I'm a modern person, or I'm a person of the world, maybe not even modern, just like of the world. And that falls in the category of bad, and it rubs me. And I know it's going to rub other people, so I don't want them to read that part. We'll hide it. Prabhupada didn't leave sections out. This is third canto, what to speak of keeping, further and further. Now this is third canto where in the sequence of the previous chapter, and now in this chapter, it's just the beginning of this chapter, Krishna's pastimes in Vrindavan and out of Vrindavan have been narrated in the third canto, and people haven't had the foundation of the first 9 cantos before getting to the 10th canto, and here it is in the third canto. And we have been trained, those who read Prabhupada's books and hear his recorded lectures, know that you don't go to 10th canto right away. You go through the first, if you're going to understand it, you go first the first 9 cantos, and then you're ready to read the 10th canto. Well, here it is, this pastimes that are from the 10th canto and the third canto. But it's preliminary without all the details. So the foundation is to understand there's a source of Vedanta. There's a source of everything, in principle. And that source of everything has 3 features, Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan. And Krishna is the pinnacle of the Bhagavan feature who has many expansions. But he's the origin of all the expansions and everything. So that comes in first canto. And then after that, building upon the foundation. But it's not everything, it's just pieces of everything. And so to work our way through third canto, etc., because there are many other beyond phenomenal messages. Take one, cosmology. For somebody that's interested, there's going to the group of devotees, Bhaktivedanta Institute for Higher Studies, BIHS, they're conducting a 3-day seminar inviting scholars from all around the world to discuss Vedic cosmology. So scholars are not necessarily Vaishnavas. Scholars are scholars, and some are Vaishnava scholars. And I don't know what the invitation list is, but if you're interested, you can contact somebody that's part of that group. Paramarupa has received those. I received those. I'm not going to be available to participate, but it's very interesting. Probably going to be recorded. So that's something that's another one of those. Like, how do we understand all that? Like the question during the retreat. We hear all about creation. How do I understand that? I can't verify it. I can't nullify it either, because it's beyond empiric knowledge. So how do you process knowledge that's beyond empiric knowledge? Well, even to understand empiric things, one should hear those empiric things like cosmology through apauruṣeyā sabda praman. And the empiric evaluation may match or may not match apauruṣeyā sabda praman. That's to be expected, or may get close to. So one of the things I've learned, just sharing, because I periodically, or maybe even say regularly, interact with the devotee that's in charge of the Temple of Vedic Planetarium. He's very kind. It takes him a while because he's busy, but he responds to all my questions in detail, comprehensively. And one of the concerns that he is cautious about is comparing the empiric model with the Vedic model, and people trying to match them. He doesn't go there. I mean, it's not that he doesn't know what the empiric model is, or what they say about this and that. He certainly knows, because that's his field. But he doesn't try to match them up. This matches and that doesn't match, and why. And there are things that do match. There are things that do not match. Anyway, if you're interested, Vedic Cosmology 3-day seminar, scholars from around the world. Apparently it's going to be an in-person event and broadcast, live stream, and then recorded, most likely. So if you're interested, check with Paramarupa. He can help you. I mean, you may have to have an invitation from the organizers. I don't know. But if you're interested. You have one. Oh, nice. Okay. Okay, I'm not either. It's a top, anyway, so back to the principle. The principle is there are subject matters that are worldly that we don't have a correct understanding of because we don't have apauruṣeyā, the Praman as the source. And there are people that have that source and they have differing opinions. Now what are you going to do? Hit the reset button or pick and choose? What are you going to do? As far as possible, you go to the text. And what does the text say? And then how do you read the text? The different people will read the texts in different ways. Anyway, back to third canto, chapter 4, text number 2. It says, fire starts in forests if the Supreme Lord so sanctions, not like chooses or prefers, let's have a big fire. But if he sanctions, then there's a method. It doesn't have to be with people setting fires in forests, although my guess is that's more common than it just happens with bamboos, because forests happen where there's no bamboos. But in any case, that's one of the ways, and it happens, the bamboo clashing and sparks flying, and the sparks landing on dry leaves, and then there's fire, and the fire expands. Sanctioned by the Supreme Lord. By the will of the Supreme, it takes place. Similarly, the descendants of Yadu were all destroyed by the will of the Lord, by the process of self-destruction. That was another reason. Who could withdraw the Yadus because they can't be stopped by anybody? They'll have to do it themselves. That's another reason. Self-annihilation was the method because there wouldn't be another method. They're very powerful. Now, their power is a power invested in them by the Supreme Lord, so that could be another answer. Why did he just withdraw the power? And then they can be defeated by some other method. Their departure can be some other method. They just get old and die. That would be like a simpler way, wouldn't it? And there's another. If even you may be a great person, you indulge in intoxication, it's very destructive to you and to others. That's a nice lesson. There's some price for that lesson, but they're his eternal associates anyways. Or they're expansions of demigods who have their spiritual counterpart before they became demigods. That's a whole other topic. I'm going to touch on that topic during the Memorial Day weekend. I'll just run it up the flagpole. Our acharyas have scriptural reference to indicate that two of the associates of, and they're just examples of many, but two of the associates of Lord Ramachandra were two brothers, the sons of the Ashvini Kumaras, Dvidvita and Minda, older brother, younger brother. I mean, older just because they're twins, sons of the Ashvini Kumaras. And several references indicate Minda and Dvidvita have the position in Ayodhya in the spiritual realm. The Minda and Dvidvita that appeared as the sons of Ashvini Kumaras were Shakti expansions, or expansions of the Shakti, or angsas of the Shakti of the residents of the spiritual world, given the names Minda and Dvidvita. And so they were very powerful. And as their power to assist Ram in his Leela was very useful in the war and at other times. They're very, very, very powerful. But one of them, at least, Dvidvita, became a demon. So we're going to discuss, that's one of my topics, but I wanted to touch on this. There's the spiritual world, there's heavily positioned, those heavily positioned persons are expansions, partial expansions of the residents of the spiritual world, and those persons then may manifest in this realm for some purpose of the Supreme Lord. So it's like, the principle is simple, the methodology can be a little confusing and complicated, like, what? How does this technology work? Because we like to know by our little binary processors, how does everything work? And, scholarly, elevated personalities have a simple explanation, and it's not always the technology except by the will of the Supreme Lord. Again, the whitewash. Leela. But it's not whitewash, it's how things happen. The Swarup Shakti of the Supreme Lord makes things that are ordinarily not what we experience, he manifests them at his will. And he doesn't need anybody's permission. He doesn't need anybody's help. He doesn't even need to do anything. He just wills it and voila. And that's a nice principle. So if the principle is understood, then we go to scripture and we go to qualified acharyas to help us understand the scripture. And then we can have more of an understanding than just scratching our head and making judgments, or, public or private, or even within the mind. Questions about why. So we may not understand the why or the how, but the scripture and our acharyas helping us to understand both the why and the how makes it easier. And ultimately, realization of everything is resting upon our faith in the Supreme Lord. realization of something we don't understand is resting upon our faith in the Supreme Lord and the process of serving Him without conditions. And great souls, that's their quality. And they can explain things that we can't understand. We can accept them or not accept them. And they can offer explanations or not offer explanations. We're dependent. It's nice. Maybe uncomfortable for some people, but it's actually very nice because it's reality. And that's honesty. Standard of honesty. So let's see if there's some discussion. How are we doing with time? Okay, 10 after. Comments or questions?
Maharaj, I have my theme of thoughts or questions around relationships with devotees, and this idea of, at least that's where my mind was going when you start off the class around sense perception, and I was considering. So there's the three sense perception. There's Hanuman and Shabda.
Yeah.
And then Jiva Goswami expands those into 10 in the Tattva Sandarbha.
Yes.
And then I was considering like something that is very meaningful, very deep for me is, for example, sitting here in Bhagavatam class is an experience, even beyond the words that we may hear, is an experience at the heart level is very sweet, very meaningful, very powerful. It feels like you're coming in touch with something transcendental. What is that experience? Is that falls in any of those three categories, or is it a combination? And I was trying to understand what that experience is.
It's a relationship with Krishna through sound. In the spiritual realm, things are not stagnant, they're dynamic. And the experience sometimes may be this, and sometimes maybe that, and sometimes maybe something else. Sometimes maybe more intense, sometimes. But what it is a relationship between the Supreme Lord through the agency of sound. He, Krishna, is extending himself to us through sound. Srimad Bhagavatam is the sound manifestation of the form of Krishna. And when you contact the sound manifestation of the form of Krishna, it stirs something, that forgotten relationship, and one experiences that stirring in different ways. It's a relationship with Krishna through sound. Is that right? You're looking at me like I didn't answer your question.
I'm trying to soak it. So Shabda is
Not different than Krishna.
And that's
It's
the
Swarup
experience.
Shakti.
Next question, Maharaj, is one of the things that we experience in devotees' relation, we use our sense perception to understand one another and relate with one another
Of
based on
course.
sense perception, which sometimes leads to judgmentalism and
Misunderstanding of varieties.
all of that. And my question is maturity, spiritual maturity, symptomized by stronger ability to give benefit of the doubt because
No.
we know where.
No, maturity means discernment is right on. Now, how do you process the discernment? This is advanced stage, not us, but advanced stage. Discernment is right on. Now, judgmentalism is not the characteristic of an advanced devotee. It's right in Nectar of Instruction. The topmost stage is those who are free from criticism. So judgmentalism means criticism, or criticism means judgmentalism. You can see what's what, and then you interact according to, for the most advanced devotees, according to Krishna's desire. And sometimes. Sometimes tolerate, sometimes chastise, sometimes.
Third question, Maharaj. Last question. In this particular case, where the Yadus are fighting with one another, it's Krishna's desire.
It's not just sanction, it's desire.
It's Krishna's desire. And there's difference between Krishna's sanction versus Krishna's desire.
Yes.
In just a couple of days ago, I was having a conversation with a leader in our movement and leader of a temple. And they were commenting how dissension among the devotees where they're serving is Krishna's plan. And I was considering in my mind, is it Krishna's plan necessarily or Krishna's sanction? It's probably situation dependent. But I wanted to hear from you, your thoughts on, I feel uncomfortable. Basically, I feel uncomfortable when persons make that declaration, it's Krishna's plan. When there's dissension.
No.
Even though it's ISKCON, I get it.
I would want to ask the person who said that, in what way do you mean his plan? As opposed to his sanction. So, clarification, please. Because Krishna's plan is what? Fill in the blank. Krishna's plan is not what this material world is. It's not Krishna's here. It's his plan. Dissension is his plan. No, let's go to Maharaj Parikshit not killing the personality Kali because he knew it was Krishna's plan. That there'd be the age of Kali, and if he killed Kali, then he'd be interfering with Krishna's plan. So, in that sense, it's depending upon what this senior person had to say, dissension is Krishna's plan in the sense that time moves, and this is the time of Kali, and it's Krishna's plan that it's the time of Kali. Depends on what they mean by that. But his plan is then also to give sanction to living entities who sanction that plan, to give living entities the opportunity to try to enjoy without him. So there's a plan whereby they can try to enjoy without him. And the movements of time and the movements of the modes of nature through the influence of time is part of his plan to sanction living entities' desire. So it depends on what the person, how they perceive it. But like it's Krishna's plan, so it's just yummy. No worries, Prabhu. It's Krishna's plan. Depends on how they mean it. Definitions are important. Yes.
Hare Krishna, Guru Maharaj. I have a follow-up on Yamuna Jivan Prabhu's question.
Which one?
On the Shabda Praman and Pratyaksha Praman. So I'd been contemplating on this, Guru Maharaj. Initially, we hear that Pratyaksha Praman is not right for us because...
It's not conclusive. We still use it.
Yeah, because we have imperfect senses.
Not just because we have senses, so we have to use them. And by using them, they become purified. So what's behind the pratyaksha praman, and pratyaksha itself is resting upon what? And if it's not resting upon apauruṣeyā sabda praman, then it's part of the entanglement.
Yeah, I was somehow thinking about pratyaksha praman is not right, so I have to just dump it off.
Well, no, you just refine it. Don't dump it off.
So as you were responding to Prabhu, it just dawned on me, we have this pratyaksha avagamam dharmyam. It has to be perceived, that connection to the heart.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I was also thinking about...
Now, what does that mean? Behind it is, how do you perceive pratyaksha avagamam dharmyam? How does that happen? Resting upon apauruṣeyā sabda praman, because otherwise you can't perceive the soul. And through sabda praman, you can perceive the soul. Not in the same way of sense perception as get out your binoculars or your microscope out and you can see it. It's a different kind of seeing, different kind of pratyaksha.
I was also connecting this to when we begin the devotional service, I was seeing that, Guru Maharaj, I have my teachers and my spiritual master. I see their faith in Prabhupada, their faith in Krishna, and that's absolute. I just take it and keep going.
Good.
But as I keep going, there is a phase where it's kind of being shaken.
Kind of what? What's the word?
Shaken.
Shaken.
I don't know exactly shaken. I don't know if that's the right word, Guru Maharaj. But it seems like I have to develop my own. I just cannot operate on somebody else's faith.
It doesn't mean you stop being a servant. You just stop wanting and experiencing realization. It comes back to his question, or related to his question. It's meant for you to experience. Same as the verse you quoted, pratyaksha avagamam dharmyam. It's meant for you to experience. But for you to experience, you don't trash the first part. It just matures. Clear? I hope you get there. That's it? Okay. Anyone else? Yes.
Guru Maharaj, yesterday evening, you read a couple sentences from Srila Prabhupada's purport, the first canto, 5th chapter, and I wanted to understand that with respect to the apauruṣeyā sabda praman that we're discussing this morning.
Okay, here we go.
So Prabhupada says, after all, it is a technical science of spiritual values, and thus we are concerned with the techniques and not with the language. If the techniques of this great literature are understood by the people of the world, there will be success. So technical science, and I'm thinking that science, just like values, has a very conventional definition.
Yes, it does.
And this morning we're saying, yes, it's a science. However, we will not understand it unless we put our faith in apauruṣeyā sabda praman.
That's right.
So it occurs to me that the way I think of science, because it is defined by convention, is faulty in understanding.
So how does Prabhupada use the word science is what your question is.
Yes.
What's the non-conventional but Prabhupada definition of science? Well, you've read his writings and heard his lectures, and in short, it's similar to your question yesterday evening. It's verifiable. And he would use the model of modern science. There's hypothesis, experimentation, observation, conclusion. He'd go through. That's the modern, and so in that sense, it's also a science. It's not, back to her question about realizing her own stuff, her own spiritual experience. It is meant to be. There's hypothesis, there's the experiment. Now, the experiment is not through these senses as we know them, or the mind as we know them. It's purifying the senses and the mind through the process of the experiment. But then observation, that's observation on the spiritual platform. And until then, we're going along in a, not a blind faith, but a guided faith in apauruṣeyā sabda praman. Now, it's back to his question about relationships. There's the experience of hearing it, the experience that we have when hearing it. What is that? It's the apauruṣeyā sabda praman acting upon the heart. And then the experience in relationships, and when relationships become disturbed, because relationships is your meditation these days. So it's the mind and senses get in the way, and we're not having that nice experience. So back to your question, it's the techniques, not the language. So what does that mean? One of the ways of saying what that means is, like he says in the purport, supposing the house is on fire and you go out in the neighborhood and you don't speak the language, but somehow you communicate, the house is on fire. So the language is not, it's the essence. So that you say techniques, it's the whatever are the techniques that one can't speak the language and tries to get people to know the house is on fire. The essence is not the language. The essence is the communication. And whatever it is, the sense of urgency. And so the sense of urgency may help people pay attention when otherwise they would not pay attention. So techniques and science, the words techniques, and it says spiritual science, means those things that I just said. It's not, doesn't matter your IQ, doesn't matter your birth, it doesn't matter so many things. There may be assets that help, and that's nice. And they may not be there. It doesn't mean you can't access the science. There's principles or fundamentals that when approached, even a very simple person, not highly educated, simple person can have full realization. Maybe not be able to articulate it in the way that someone that has those skills can articulate, but they can carry the science of it. And then there's different manifestations of the science of it from different persons who have different endowments, gifts from the Supreme Lord. Bhakti isn't dependent. As Krishna is independent, Bhakti is independent. And that's part of the science. Verifiable by people that aren't highly educated, etc., can have profound realizations. Or at least be so dedicated and devoted to Krishna that they're impervious to the material circumstances. They can carry on in their devotional service despite obstacles or worse, harassment or worse. Death threats. Anyone else? Online. Okay.
This is from Sri Rupa Mataji. I often fall into the trap of judging Bhagavatam by volatile standards of the modern world. How do we read or teach Srimad Bhagavatam based on time, place, and circumstances?
Well, I got the first part, but the second part. How do we read Srimad Bhagavatam based upon Time, place, circumstance.
Read or teach.
Huh?
Read and teach.
Read and
Teach.
speak.
Teaching.
Teach. Well, there are two different functions, read and then speaking, or teaching. The teaching has to do with the audience, and according to the audience, then you select a method for teaching. Not too much, not too little, something that's relatable, etc., etc., etc. Different audiences, different teaching approaches. So it takes intelligence. And to read is, fundamental apauruṣeyā. I want to understand. You include that I want to understand with some faith in the subject or the sound vibration itself. Go back to our earlier discussion. This is apauruṣeyā sabda. I'm a little person, and I don't understand apauruṣeyā sabda always. I get like little glimmers, but I don't understand the whole thing, and that's okay. You don't understand the whole thing. You just carry on with the respect that that Bhagavatam is Krishna, and he's making himself available in my hand. I'm reading Krishna in my hand, and he's speaking to me and revealing himself to me, although I don't understand because I'm covered and so forth. But it's my relationship with Krishna that's I'm investing in. So that's a recommendation of how to read, and then how to teach or speak. It requires intelligence to discern the audience and what's going to be meaningful and relatable and reasonable, because they're going to hear it with reason, largely, not just faith. Okay. That's it. Thank you very much, Prabhupada ki. Jai.